Taylor and Jack hesitated at the top of the staircase, summoned by their mother's call. When they reached the hallway, a man with a suitcase stood there, a sight that set them both on edge. "Taylor, Jack, meet Mark," their mother, Linda, announced a little too cheerfully. "He'll be part of our family now." "Mom," Taylor replied, her voice thick with disapproval, "you haven't even finalized the divorce from Dad yet." Linda's face tightened. "That'll be over soon, thankfully," she said, clearly displeased by their reactions. "Aren't you two rushing this a bit?" Taylor pressed, unwilling to back down. "Taylor." Linda snapped, but Jack chimed in, casting a skeptical glance at the driveway. "Is that his car? I thought you said he was some big shot." "Dad drives a top-of-the-line Mercedes SUV, now that's impressive." Curious where this tension is heading? Keep listening to find out if this new family has a chance of holding together. "Good to see you, kids," Mark offered awkwardly, trying to break the ice after Jack's less-than-kind comparison to their father. "Yeah, I'm in the market to upgrade soon too. I've got a promotion in the works, so hopefully, we'll have that chance." Taylor and Jack didn't look the least bit impressed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the air. Linda turned to them, seething quietly. "Welcome Mark into our home," she demanded, trying to mask her frustration. "Sure, whatever," Taylor replied coldly, already heading back up the stairs. "They just need a little time," Linda said in a low voice to an obviously shaken Mark. "Don't worry, I'll talk to them, they'll adjust." 16-year-old Taylor and 12-year-old Jack had learned of their parents' divorce 6 months earlier, not long after they found out their mom had been unfaithful. They'd already spent 2 years watching their parents argue, witnessing their mother grow more and more distant from their father, Dave, often speaking to him with open disdain. She'd use any excuse to get away. Weekends and holidays were spent with friends or family. After a while, even Taylor and Jack couldn't buy her excuses anymore. Watching their dad lose his dignity in the fight to save his marriage had been a special kind of pain. Their parents had tried counseling, but Mark was always hovering in the background. At night, they could hear their dad crying in the quiet of the house. After 2 years, Dave finally cracked. He'd found undeniable proof of her affair and filed for divorce, laying the blame squarely on Mark. Their parents had sat them down to explain the separation, and Jack had cried while Taylor looked at her mother with barely hidden resentment. Linda had avoided looking at them, too uncomfortable to meet their eyes. She'd tried to split the blame between herself and their dad, but no one bought it. The best explanation she could muster was that she'd simply fallen in love with someone else. 3 agonizing months followed as Dave searched for a new place to live, and when he finally moved out, Linda was visibly relieved. Yet, the atmosphere in the house didn't improve. Both Taylor and Jack were still angry, but Linda was too wrapped up with Mark to notice. From the day Dave left and divorce proceedings began, bitterness filled the home. Whatever love had once existed between Dave and Linda had withered away. Dave pushed for full custody of both kids and the house. Linda fought back, demanding more child support, ownership of the house, while still expecting Dave to cover the mortgage, and control over when he could see the kids. It took 6 months to settle the divorce, and by the time the judge's unemotional ruling came, nobody felt satisfied. Dave was ordered to keep paying half the mortgage until Linda remarried, if that ever happened, along with regular child support. Custody got tricky with the kids' age difference. Taylor was old enough to decide where to live, but Jack wasn't, so it was ruled that Jack would stay in the family home with Linda during the week and spend weekends with his dad. Taylor, reluctantly, agreed to do the same for her brother's sake. She broke down in tears as she explained her choice to her father, and Dave, also tearing up, told her how proud he was of her for looking out for her brother. The divorce ended up pulling Taylor and Jack closer, with Taylor stepping up to look after Jack while their mom remained focused on her relationship with Mark. About a month later, Linda invited Taylor and Jack for dinner to formally meet Mark. It didn't take long for the kids to sense what kind of person he was. Taylor, Jack, this is Mark, the man I'm seeing," Linda said proudly, holding his hand. "You mean the guy you cheated on Dad with?" Taylor remarked with a smirk. Jack slouched in his chair, folding his arms and looking away. "Taylor!" Linda barked, glancing around to check if anyone had overheard her daughter's comment. "It's all right, Linda," Mark said, forcing a smile, though Taylor's blunt remark clearly unsettled him. "I wish your mom and I had met differently, but when you're older, you'll understand that love doesn't always go as planned." "Yeah, Dad learned that the hard way," Taylor shot back. For a split second, anger flashed across Mark's face, while Linda struggled to keep her own anger in check. Trying to shift the mood, Mark turned to Jack with a forced cheerfulness. "So, I heard you're quite the baseball player, Jack." "Yeah, I'm all right," Jack muttered, refusing to look his way. "Maybe we could play sometime?" Mark suggested with a hopeful grin. Linda jumped in eagerly. "Wouldn't that be nice, Jack?" "Thank you, Mark." "Nah," Jack mumbled. The smiles faded from Linda and Mark's faces. The tension at the table thickened, with Taylor's open hostility, Jack's sullenness, Mark's disappointed expression, and Linda's frustration just barely contained. The rest of the meal passed in silence, and when dessert was offered, both kids declined, eager to leave. As they drove home, Linda let her irritation show. "That was incredibly rude of you too. Mark really tried to connect with you, and you completely embarrassed him." "I don't like him," Jack muttered from the back seat. "I can't believe you left Dad for him," Taylor added. "Dad is better in every way." Linda swiped away a tear, visibly upset. "If you'd just give him a chance, you'd love him as much as I do. He's such a wonderful person." Linda's words hung in the air, but neither Taylor nor Jack replied. As soon as they got home, the kids retreated to their rooms, leaving their mother in tears, apologizing to Mark over the phone for their behavior. "Dad, you can't just ignore this," Taylor vented in frustration, recounting the whole uncomfortable evening with Mark. "You need to tell Mom we don't want anything to do with him." "I'm not thrilled about it either," Dave answered, his tone irritable but then softening to comfort his daughter. "But this was bound to happen. There's really nothing I can do unless he actually harms you. Unfortunately, it's your mom's choice, and you're probably going to be seeing a lot more of him." Dave's instincts were on point. Linda convinced herself that the more time Taylor and Jack spent with Mark, the sooner they'd come to accept and even like him. To her, Mark was an amazing person, and eventually, the kids would understand. So Mark started coming over for dinners, sometimes staying the night. Despite his attempts to connect, the kids' interactions with him were minimal at best. He tried to win them over with gifts, only for Linda to find the boxes unopened and discarded in the trash after he'd left. In one particularly hopeful moment, she even invited Mark's parents over, referring to them as Taylor and Jack's step-grandparents. Much to Linda's dismay, and Mark's parents' awkward bewilderment, the kids remained distant and disengaged. One evening, Linda couldn't hold back her frustration any longer. "Taylor, Jack, we need to talk," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Inside, she was boiling. She'd made every effort to bring Mark into their lives, only for the kids to repeatedly shut him out. She was convinced Dave was somehow encouraging this. "Why are you treating Mark like this? He's been nothing but kind to you, yet neither of you will give him a chance. Is your dad telling you to act this way?" "Dad says it's your problem, not his," Taylor shot back. "And for the record, we don't like Mark because of what he did to Dad. I can't believe you're forcing him on us." "Taylor, Mark and I are together, and you'll just have to accept that," Linda replied, trying to stay calm but clearly irritated. "He's going to be in your lives, whether you want it or not." Instantly, Linda regretted her words. "So you are forcing him on us," Taylor said, voicing the very thing Linda had dreaded hearing. "No one's forcing anything on you," Linda insisted, almost pleading now. "Mark's going to be a part of this family. I just want you to let him make you as happy as he makes me. That's exactly what it sounds like. You're forcing him on us, Taylor replied, not budging. You need to accept that we don't like him and never will. And what about you, Jack? Linda asked, turning to him with a hint of reproach. Do you feel the same way? Jack just shook his head slowly, an expression of disgust crossing his face. I don't want to know him, he said quietly. Linda couldn't comprehend her kids' behavior. Why were they being so difficult? Frustration boiled within her, and it was beginning to strain her relationship with Mark. They could only be close on weekends, when Taylor and Jack were with their dad. Ironically, things had almost been easier back when she was still married and sneaking around with Mark. The more Linda dwelled on it, the more she became convinced that Dave was behind her children's rejection of Mark. After that tense conversation with Taylor and Jack, she made it a point to ensure that Dave saw Mark every time he dropped off or picked up the kids. She wanted to flaunt what she imagined as a happy, blended family, hoping to show him that he couldn't come between them. At first, Linda was smugly pleased to see how uncomfortable Mark's presence made Dave. But over time, something shifted. Dave started to look more at ease, even content. Out of spite, she tried sending Mark to pick up the kids once, but they refused to get into his car, opting to ride home with their dad instead. Linda's hope was for Mark to move in with them soon, but he was more hesitant than she'd anticipated. Despite the challenges with the kids, she thought things between them were going smoothly. And now here they were. Mark stood at the doorway with his suitcase and belongings in his plain, unimpressive car, and once again, Taylor and Jack were insulting him while she tried her best to comfort him. If Linda thought Mark's moving in would make her children accept him, she was sorely mistaken. The already strained atmosphere in the house only worsened. Taylor and Jack outright refused to interact with him. Meals were silent affairs, and whenever Mark tried to make small talk, the kids would sit stone-faced, waiting for him to give up. Offers to play ball with Jack were flatly rejected, and when Mark suggested teaching Taylor how to drive, she quickly responded, "Dad's teaching me." Any attempt to integrate Mark into their lives was met with stony indifference. On the rare occasions when they were forced into family activities with him, it only led to more tension and resentment. It wasn't long before Mark started grumbling about the situation, even suggesting that Taylor and Jack spend more time with their dad. Furious, Linda confronted Dave the next time he came to pick up the kids. "Dave, you need to talk to the kids about how they're treating Mark," she snapped. "Stop turning them against him." "And just what is it you expect me to do?" Dave shrugged, his expression unbothered. "You're the one who brought that guy into their lives, not me." "I know you're behind this," she accused. "If you don't stop, I'll go to court and limit your access to Taylor and Jack." Dave shook his head in disbelief, a slight smile of incredulity crossing his face. "Linda, you cheated on me with him, and now you're upset the kids aren't interested in accepting your boyfriend? Maybe relationships built on lies aren't all they're cracked up to be. Taylor and Jack are good kids who can make up their own minds. They know what's right and wrong without my influence. What's happening between them and Mark? That's not my concern." Linda glared at him, then stormed back inside. The only relief she found was when Taylor and Jack went to their dad's, leaving her alone with Mark for a rare weekend getaway that brought a temporary lift to their faltering relationship. But before long, it became clear just how unfazed Dave was by her relationship with Mark. One evening, after Dave dropped them off, Taylor and Jack eagerly shared stories about Callie, Dave's new girlfriend, over dinner. She'd shown up at Dave's place unexpectedly while he was out of town for work, with the kids home alone. The surprise meeting with his girlfriend, Callie, went incredibly well. Dave, eager to hear how things had gone, rushed back to find that Taylor and Jack had warmed up to Callie almost instantly. After answering a few awkward questions and explaining that Callie already knew about them and understood how his marriage ended, and that she made him truly happy, the kids embraced her with open arms. Linda felt a surge of anger hearing about it. Her kids had barely mentioned Mark's name after 6 months of trying, yet after one spontaneous meeting, they were hugging their dad's new girlfriend like they'd known her for ages. Determined to prove that her relationship with Mark was just as successful, Linda began flooding her social media with photos. She posted endless pictures of her and Mark smiling, hugging, proclaiming her happiness to anyone who'd look. There were even photos with the kids, shots of Mark attending Jack's baseball games and Taylor's soccer matches, all carefully crafted to present Mark as a loving stepfather. Then Jack's birthday rolled around, and it turned into a battleground. Linda organized the party at their home, sparing no expense. Not only did Jack's friends come, but their parents, siblings, and even Mark's extended family were invited. Linda referred to Mark's nephews as Taylor and Jack's cousins. Yet, to Linda's frustration, Jack insisted on inviting Dave, and Dave, in turn, insisted on contributing to the event. The party went well for Jack, who was thrilled with his friends, and Taylor, who knew many of the older siblings. But Linda's excitement to introduce Mark to the parents of Jack's friends hit a wall. Dave already knew them all, and they were delighted to catch up with him. Linda could see Mark being pushed to the background in what was supposed to be his own home. Jack barely acknowledged Mark, even avoiding photos with him, spending most of his time with Dave. The other parents took notice, and Linda couldn't help but feel that her carefully planned party was being overshadowed. Then Mark did something completely unexpected. He got down on one knee and proposed, producing a ring Linda had no idea he'd bought. Shocked and overcome with joy, Linda burst into happy tears as the guests applauded. She was certain it was the happiest moment of her life. She insisted on a group photo of her, Mark, Taylor, and Jack, convinced they were all finally about to become a true family. If Taylor and Jack had any objections to the engagement, they kept them to themselves. It seemed that Mark's proposal was the turning point. Their attitude toward him shifted, they started talking to him, even spending time with him one-on-one and smiling in his presence. The tension that had plagued the household for months seemed to melt away. In her mind, Linda felt she finally had the family she dreamed of from the moment she met Mark. Convinced everything was perfect, Linda saw no reason to delay the wedding. The wedding was set for the beginning of the kids' summer break, which worked perfectly. Dave could take them while Linda and Mark went on their honeymoon. She had wanted the wedding to happen the moment the ink on the divorce papers dried. Yet, the one thing that soured her excitement was Dave's indifference. All she received from him was a flat, "Congratulations," and a shrug. Honestly, he was useless. Divorcing him had been the best choice of her life. Everything leading up to the wedding went off without a hitch. The preparations were flawless. Every invited guest accepted, and on the wedding day, the sun shone brightly in a warm, perfect sky. It seemed like nothing could go wrong. In the weeks before the wedding, Linda started noticing a change in the kids. She couldn't quite place it, but they seemed oddly excited, almost nervously so, as if they couldn't wait for something to happen. She figured it was probably the wedding and the anticipation of summer break. That made sense. The wedding was a grand event, after all, and the kids were set to play important roles. Linda had originally wanted her father to walk her down the aisle, but her parents didn't approve of Mark. So, Xander would walk her down the aisle instead, and Taylor would be her bridesmaid. Linda relished wedding dress shopping with Taylor, and Xander seemed content picking out a suit with Mark. The wedding was to be held at a lakeside resort nearby, with stunning grounds that promised perfect photos. Linda couldn't remember feeling this excited about anything in her life. During the rehearsal, though, Linda noticed something strange. Taylor and Jack were only smiling at each other, almost like they were in on a joke. They looked uninterested, and whatever warmth they'd shown in the past months seemed to have vanished. They kept whispering and giggling, making the whole rehearsal difficult. Linda felt her irritation growing, but Mark, surprisingly, came to their defense. "Relax, they're just kids," he said. "They're probably excited or nervous." Of course, Mark was right. By now, Taylor and Jack had completely accepted him, so there was no reason they'd act up on purpose. The wedding day started beautifully. Linda and Taylor spent the morning together getting their hair, nails, and makeup done, both looking radiant. The catering arrived on time, and the flowers were perfect. But then, just moments before the ceremony, things started going wrong. Jack went missing, and when Taylor went to find him, she didn't come back either. Linda paced in front of the hotel's little chapel, her nerves fraying. The guests were seated, waiting. Mark was at the altar, waiting. But where were the kids? She couldn't walk down the aisle without them. When they finally returned, she turned to them, furious. "Where have you been?" she snapped. "Jack, where's your boutonniere?" Jack looked down, a sly grin crossing his face. "I think I left it in the room," he said. Taylor stifled a laugh. "This isn't a joke." Linda snapped, her frustration boiling over. "Jack, go get it, now." Jack, momentarily stunned, turned and dashed back to the room. Linda felt her nerves stretching thin. Everything had been flawless until now, and she wasn't about to let a missing boutonniere ruin her big day. The officiant stepped out of the chapel, giving her a concerned look. "My son just forgot his boutonniere," Linda chuckled, rolling her eyes. "Kids." But inside, she wasn't laughing. 15 minutes later, Jack returned, boutonniere in hand. Linda pinned it on him herself, adjusting his tie and fastening the top button of his suit. "Honestly, Jack, you're 13. You should know how to dress yourself," she muttered irritably. "Try to keep it together for the rest of the day." Taking his hand, she forced a smile. "All right, Taylor, let's go." Taylor opened the chapel door and led her mother and brother down the aisle. Nervous and focused, Linda didn't notice that neither of her kids were smiling. As she reached the altar, she beamed at Mark, mouthing a quick "hi" as she kissed both children, who then took seats at the front. Immediately, the siblings leaned in, whispering until the officiant cleared his throat and shot them a pointed look, which brought a chuckle from the crowd. The officiant began the ceremony, remarking on Linda's radiance and the joy of seeing her and Mark come together, even noting how lucky Taylor and Jack were to have Mark joining their family. Linda and Mark glanced at the kids, smiling warmly, and the children returned the gesture, sweetly smiling back. One by one, friends stood to speak about how Linda and Mark were a wonderful match, perfect for each other. With each heartfelt word, any lingering stress Linda felt melted away, leaving her wrapped in joy. But as the officiant moved closer to the vows, he paused and announced, "And now, by the laws of the state, I must ask if anyone objects to the union of Linda and Mark." A hush fell over the room, punctuated by a few nervous laughs, until, suddenly, Taylor and Jack sprang from their seats and shouted in unison, "We object." Linda whirled around, staring at her children in shock and horror. The officiant blinked, nearly stepping back, while the guests gasped, some more than once. Mark stared straight ahead, slowly shaking his head, a look of disbelief mixed with a wry smile. "Taylor, Jack, what are you doing?" Linda's voice shook as her eyes filled with tears. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and here her children were, tearing it apart. Taylor stepped forward, standing beside Jack, determined to explain. "I'm sure most of you are wondering why Mom and Mark are getting married so soon, or why they moved in together right after she split up with Dad. The truth is, they've been seeing each other for almost 2 years, even while Mom was still married to Dad," Taylor said, her voice clear and steady. "They're both cheaters. Mom cheated on Dad with Mark." "Mark, is this true?" his parents asked, hurt and visibly shaken. Mark didn't respond. He didn't even turn to face them. Around them, murmurs of disapproval began to ripple through the crowd. Linda hissed at Taylor, her panic setting in fast. This was quickly turning into a nightmare. Most of the guests had no idea about her affair with Mark, which they had always kept quiet. "We hate Mark," Jack added, his voice full of anger. "He's the reason our family split up. Our dad cried all the time because Mom was with Mark. We had to live with them while she was seeing him, and then she forced him on us. We don't want Mark to marry our mom, we don't want him to be our stepdad, and we definitely don't want to live with him. Mom, if you marry Mark, we're moving in with Dad. Taylor's gaze hardened as she practically growled, we mean it. Taylor, what are you saying? Please, don't do this, Linda pleaded, turning desperately to Mark. Just give me a minute. I'll talk to them, and we'll sort this out. Mark shook his head slowly, his voice almost disturbingly calm. No, Linda. I'm done. I'm not about to spend the rest of my life dealing with disrespect from these brats. They don't like me, and they never will. And honestly, I don't like them either. I've poured time and a small fortune into this, and all I've gotten back is attitude. I'll marry you, but only if it means we live without them. Linda fell silent, staring at Mark in a way that made it clear she could never accept that choice. I figured, Mark muttered, and he turned, walking toward the door. Frantically, Linda grabbed his arm. Mark, we can fix this. No, there's nothing to fix, Linda. This is just the reality, he replied before he walked out of the chapel. Linda stood frozen, her heart breaking, black streaks of mascara running down her face as she watched her fiancé walk out of her life. Why? She cried, turning to her children, her voice choked with tears. Why did you do this to me? Because we hate you for what you did to Dad, Jack replied coldly. You made us live with the man you cheated on Dad with. Who does that? Taylor demanded, her face tight with anger. You turned Dad's life, and ours, into a nightmare. For a moment, a jolt of clarity struck Linda. All this time with Mark, she'd never stopped to think about how her choices might affect her children. She'd been so convinced they would come to love him. But they never did, and they never would. In her pursuit of her own happiness, she had shattered her relationship with the two people she loved most, and now she feared they might never forgive her. Linda just stared at her children, then sank to the floor, sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I had no idea you felt this way. I didn't think it would come to this. She looked up, reaching out, her voice pleading in the now empty chapel. I love you, please. I love you. But Taylor and Jack didn't approach. Their brows were furrowed, and though they looked upset, neither moved. Their plan had succeeded, but they probably hadn't anticipated seeing their mother reduced to such a broken, sorrowful figure on the floor in front of them. Taylor, do you have a phone? Linda's mother asked gently, breaking the tense silence. Taylor nodded, opening her purse to show her. You and Jack, go back to your rooms and change. Call your dad to come pick you up. You'll be staying with him for a while, she said softly. But, what about Mom? Taylor asked, her concern showing through. Don't worry about her. We'll take care of your mother, her grandmother replied reassuringly. I'll speak to your dad tonight and explain what happened. You can see her in a few days, after things have settled. Linda's father gently helped her up from the floor and led her out of the chapel. She kept glancing back at her children, who stood there, looking both shaken and resolute. Their grandmother gave them a comforting hug. There's no need to apologize, she whispered. Your grandfather and I never cared for Mark, nor the way your mom treated your dad. She'll face the consequences of her choices, and they're going to weigh on her. In time, it might be for the best, but right now, it's difficult. She'll have to work hard to earn your forgiveness, and she'll need to realize that she brought this on herself. She'll also have to rebuild a respectful relationship with your dad, as the father of her children. What she's done is serious, and I'm not sure he'll ever completely forgive her. Linda has a long road ahead to heal and to learn. It could take years, even therapy. I love you both, Taylor and Jack, she said, her voice softening. Don't worry, things will be okay. Your grandfather and I will always be here for you. Now, let's go home. Together with their grandmother, Taylor and Jack left the scene of their mother's painful realization without looking back.